Ready? Hey, good evening, everybody. We are the next round with Jim Dunaway, Ryan Brown. I'm Lance Taylor. We got special guest, former Alabama linebacker Cory Reamer, and we are here to celebrate the Nick Saban era. I know there's probably some Auburn fans out there, so you guys can celebrate as well because Nick Saban is done. But we're here to just reminisce, tell you guys some stories. We'll have a little Q&A. We've got an open mic here. So if anybody wants to share any of their memories about the Nick Saban era, the 17 years, we will get to that in a little bit. But we appreciate you guys coming out to Otey's. Enjoy some of this great food tonight, some ice cold beer buckets full of Bud Light and some of those other great products. I will first bring in Jim Dunaway. We talked about this earlier on the show. So today was the 14th anniversary?
14 years ago today, January 18th, we started doing a show together, the three of us and Rockstar. Cory Reamer, how old were you in 2010? Oh, you just finished winning a national
That was the
championship.
first national championship.
Yeah, I remember talking to Cory out in Pasadena.
Yeah,
for the Texas game.
Yep, that was the first national championship. I remember when y'all first started the show on a different program, obviously, but it was excited for you guys to see what y'all have done to get to this point.
I'll never forget. So you guys, it was the first time we had done a show together in Newport Beach. And that's where they kept the media hotels like an hour and a half away from the Rose Bowl.
Yep.
And so we were doing a simulcast then on 690 AM and on 94.5. And we're doing the show. And you guys went and covered the game. And I went as a fan. And I went with some other Alabama fans. And I'll never forget being out back at the Rose Bowl at halftime talking to your dad. And he was smoking a heater out there. Does he still smoke?
No, he has since put it down.
Okay.
And he told me that he hated that stadium for that reason, though. You getting in and out.
Oh,
I guess the logistics of the Rose Bowl are
it's not
terrible.
great.
Never
Great.
been.
Yeah.
Never been.
It was built for humans in 1920, and it's a long tunnel to get in and out. And it's about the size of me to get through the tunnel. If you got ins and outs going, it is hard to get in and out.
Yeah, it's like a golf gallery, too, because we were just out there. And, again, they covered the Rose Bowl with Michigan and Alabama a couple of weeks ago, and they hold a sign where you can't move. And then they'll turn the sign around for you to move. So logistically, it is not fan-friendly. I will say that. The funny thing about this, and I don't know if you guys have ever heard this story, when we first met the Reamers, it was when Ian Fitzsimmons and I were doing a show on 94.5, and
Right.
we used to do Buffalo Wild Wings, Highway 150, and your parents would go every Friday night.
Every Wednesday and Friday. I mean, they were the regulars that my dad had his group of guys that always went on Wednesdays, and then both of the parents would always go on Fridays. They were always up there. They'd see you guys. Ian was always up there before he left Birmingham, and then Tony Curry was always doing something up there as well. It was always, they ran into everybody. Everybody knew my parents just because it was like the place that a lot of the sports shows were at during the week, especially when it first opened up.
You know, I thought the fascinating thing, though, early on, I learned that Cory actually grew up an Auburn fan.
I never knew that.
Like a big Auburn fan. And then you signed with Alabama. So take us back to that journey. We're obviously going to get to Nick Saban and your experiences with him. But let's just go back when you're getting recruited out of Hoover High School. You won multiple state championships. You grew up an Auburn fan. Why did you ultimately go to Bama?
Auburn didn't offer me. So,
Wow.
I mean, that was the initial reason. But the real reason was, so I was obviously an Auburn fan, and Coach Shula started recruiting me. Auburn at that time was when they had just come off the 2004 season, was the undefeated season. They got snubbed out of the national championship game. But it obviously started getting recruited. I think that, and don't quote me on this, but for some reason there wasn't a lot of Hoover kids that got recruited by Auburn at the time. I don't know if there was something going on with Tuberville and Rush Propst.
I'm going to say yes.
If there was something that was there. But anyways, some of them actually did end up signing with Auburn, but I was not heavily recruited. And at the time, Alabama was obviously under the sanctions, going through a lot of coaching changes. And I was getting recruited by Vanderbilt, Georgia Tech, and a few other schools that were out there. And
Smart kid.
I noticed that right there.
That's a flex right there.
Any Ivy League schools?
MIT actually has a football team, you know. No, it was.
You went for the easy A.
Yeah, exactly. So then I remember we had Coach Shula. They had come over for dinner with my parents at the house, and they used to do this all the time. I'm not sure if they still do, but he had like 3 stops in Birmingham where he was going to go eat dinner with some of the recruits that he was going after. And we were like the 3rd dinner that he came over to. My dad had 2 Auburn prints in our living room, like hanging above our couch, like Daniel Moore equivalents or whatever they are. So he's got 2 Auburn prints hanging above our living room. My godmother is a huge Alabama fan, has every Daniel Moore in every form or fashion. She comes over, brings 2 Daniel Moores and says, I know Coach Shula's coming over. You can replace these for the night just while they're there. Just take them down, take those Auburn things down, and you can put these up on the wall.
So you redecorated.
So my dad, funny enough, I mentioned it to my dad, and he goes, no, this is my house. I do not care.
Hey, good for him.
I do not care. He drew the line. He wouldn't. He would not do it. So the way
he did this, he went,
yeah,
this is my house.
And he had a beer in his hand at the same time. So they come over. I figured out that we can direct Coach Shula and Charlie Harbison, Coach Cheese at the time.
Oh, Cheese.
Cheese was the man. Yeah. He was one of the biggest reasons why
People
I went to
love
Alabama.
Cheese,
Cheese was the man. And we figured out we can kind of silo them when they come in. They're there for a short stop. We silo them in the front dining room. We sit down, we eat our steaks, having a great time. And then they've got to get up and leave. And right before, I think we've skirted this whole thing, but Coach Shula goes, hey, man, you mind if I use the bathroom before?
Oh.
Yeah. You know it's coming.
Yeah.
Mind if I use the bathroom before we go? I'm like, man, I'm just kind of hanging my head. And we walk around. We walk around. We don't have bathrooms in this house. We walk around the corner, and he notices immediately that there's 2 Auburn prints hanging up in our den. And he just kind of stops, and he just stares at them, and it's like Bo Jackson, Pat Sullivan, Terry Beasley, all these guys hanging up on the wall. And he just doesn't say a word, goes to the bathroom, and then he walks out to the car with me, and he gets in his car and he leaves. And I come back inside and I said, well, I hope you don't mind if you're going to be paying my way for college, because I think we just lost a scholarship there. It was over with at that point. And luckily enough, they called me the next day. The whole staff was on the phone. It was probably the most exciting day. But the kids have so much leverage these days. So when I got offered, Charlie Harbison calls me. The whole staff's on speakerphone. They extend the offer to me, and I'm like, all right, can I think about this? Can I give me 2 seconds? Can I call you right back? And they were like, well, if we hang up this phone, we're not really sure that offer is still going to be there if you call back in 5 minutes.
Wow, high pressure.
It was high pressure. I knew I was going there anyways, but the way that how recruiting is today versus what my process was completely different. So was super excited when I was able to get that offer and never thought I'd see it. But the other thing too was we went down to Auburn for camp, and there were so many high-profile recruits down there. This was my one shot to try to prove, that I got a shot that I could play here. And my dad drove me down, and we leave the camp, and Evander Holyfield had spoke. It was a pretty special day for me. But we get in the car, and before he even cranks the card, Dad looks at me and he goes, "Well, I guess you're going to look pretty good in the crimson and white," because he could just tell, it just wasn't the place for me.
Yeah.
They didn't want me, and he was more excited about that. Hey, there's a team that's pretty dang good, and they want you. They're excited about you. And he knew at that point in time that I was going to be playing for Alabama and not Auburn. And he was a huge Auburn fan growing up too. So it was a pretty big moment when he that was his way of giving me his blessing.
Well, don't let the Mike Shula print bother you at all, because I was hosting the Mike Shula show for Alabama. And the very first one I did with Mike, because I was held over from Dennis Franchione. I did the last year of him. And this is no joke. I'm socially awkward and have a nervous habit of sometimes just humming. I can't carry a tune. And Mike Shula is sitting here.
I don't know if I've ever heard you hum in all these years. Have you heard him hum?
I was doing it today, and I was doing the same song I did today. I'm about to tell you about.
I heard you do this today, and I thought of this story.
I don't know why I do this, because I'm a lifelong Alabama guy. But Shula's here, I'm here, and we start off the show, and something's wrong with the audio, so they got to fix it. I don't know Mike. This is the first time I met Mike. And so we're sitting there in silence, and I just start going, bum, 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 bum. And he goes, and I don't even know what I'm doing. I don't even know what I'm doing. And he goes, really? And I said, what? He goes, you're going to hum? You're going to host my show and hum the Auburn fight song? I said, Coach, I don't even know what I was humming. It could have been anything. And that was a true story. So him seeing those prints later on, he was used to it.
Hey, I'm sure it would the first time, especially when you're recruiting across the state.
Yeah.
You're going to see it wherever you go.
I truly believe things happen for a reason. But going back, an Auburn fan signs with Alabama, and obviously those were kind of the dark days of Alabama football. Saban, Mike Shula had a really good year in 2005?
2005, that was my freshman year.
Yeah, 2005. And then after that, it kind of implodes. And the next thing you know, Nick Saban shows up on campus. And after that, well, first of all, let's talk about that first year, the initial meeting when he walks in. You guys here, Nick Saban's going to be your head coach, a guy that had won a national championship, had coached the Miami Dolphins for multiple years, coming back to the SEC. Were you scared to death? Were you excited?
Did your dad say you're going to look good in bandy black?
Yeah, exactly. Where was the transfer portal? You got no chance of playing there. But go back to that 2005 team real quick, though. Like my freshman year, Coach Shula, we were 10-0 going into LSU and Auburn at the end of that season, and we had a team, but we had Brody Kroll was our quarterback. He got banged up, but Tyrone Prothro goes down. J.B. Clausener's our starting center, who's got a chance of playing the NFL, gets hurt, and we just kind of fall apart. Obviously, LSU and Auburn were well above our pay grade.
But LSU was Jamarcus Russell in overtime, right?
You were up at halftime. Yeah.
I tore my ACL, so I don't remember that one because I didn't get to travel for that game. I think that's right.
It was
at home. It was at home.
Yeah, and
yeah, that's right.
The offense just never recovered after Prothro. That was a really good offense with Prothro in there.
But our defense, you think about it, was
it's really good. Joe Kynes.
You had
Charlie Pepper,
Roman Harper. Roman Harper's one of my favorite players.
Yeah.
I know he's on y'all's show all the time, and he's a guy that I really enjoyed. Kind of took me under his wing. I'm sure he probably was wondering why in the world did we recruit this kid who can't run at all to play safe, because I was a safety. So I was in the safety room when I first got there, and so. But Freddie Roach and all those guys, I mean, it was a team. It was one of the best teams that I've ever been on. Probably 9 of the 11 starting guys on defense ended up playing in the league extensively, not like just a short period of time. It was a good squad. But going back to your question of when Saban shows up, the first thing that I really remember, we were talking about this with John Parker and Mike Johnson and Baron Huber and a bunch of those guys. We were texting the other day. And I was like, I don't even remember the first meeting that we really had, like team meeting room. I mean, I had to think back and remember what our team meeting room looked like because it's changed so much when I was there. But the first thing that I remember was when we came in the locker room and it was announced that he was going to be the head coach, and they were showing it on ESPN. And the whole team was there. I can't remember if we had like a conditioning deal going on or whatever, but we're all like just dripping sweat. We've been running. Rocky Colburn was the strength coach at the time, and so he was just wearing us out. And we sit down, and we're sitting on our stools in the locker room, and the TV, ESPN's playing. Nick Saban is the next head coach at Alabama.
And that's the first you had heard of it.
I don't want to say that it is, but I feel like it's the first memory that I have where it's like, here's our next coach.
But like Mal Moore had not told
I mean, it was like at that point, it was not known. It was not known.
It was like Rich Rodriguez is going to be the coach.
Well, we all thought it was. I mean, it was a done deal. He was headed to Tuscaloosa from the last thing we heard. But on ESPN, I just remember watching the clips, and it was – all they showed was not really him like coaching or some of his teams or whatever. It was all the ass chewings that he was delivering to everybody. And I'll never forget, and I don't remember who the player was, but Miami that year had drafted this offensive lineman for their first pick and whatever first round.
Yeah, it was a kid out of Texas, and I forgot his name.
I can't remember his name, but he was huge. He was like 6'7". He played left tackle, 330 pounds. And I just remember the clip of he shows up without a helmet on his first day of practice. And Coach Saban is like just beelines for the guy. He's like, what are you doing? He's like, man, I can't go today, just taking a rest day or whatever. And you can just see the clip. There's no audio of it, but the guy is like walking towards the 50 from the locker room, and then Saban meets him, and he just starts dog cussing him. Like he's just pointing his finger. You can tell he's just getting red. And the guy's like turning around, and Saban follows him all the way back to the locker room. And by the time they get there, the kid's in tears. Like this, he's got this 6'7" guy, 330 pounds, in tears for not bringing his helmet to practice that day. And I'm like, boys, this is going to be a little bit different than what we just went through with Mike Shula, where things were a lot easier. But that was the first memory that I have of when he was hired, of things are about to change.
I would tell you, and you'll remember this game, the first chance I got to see a little bit of his temper was 2008. That was the first time I did the coaches show. And I don't know if you remember that trip to Arkansas that year. That was the year that every time you guys ran off tackle, it would go for 20 yards, 16 yards, 60 yards, 80 yards. I think it was an 82-yard touchdown run and a 64-yard touchdown run. And Alabama won at something like 49-14 or something. But John Parker Wilson, who I wish was here right now, was 6 of 14 for 76 yards that day. And some of the 14 came late in the game, fourth quarter, when Alabama was up 49-14. So we're recording the coaches show on the field. We do it right after the game on the field. Stadium's empty, but there's some guy who's in the end zone skybox there in Fayetteville who is drunk off his ass. And we'd start the show. Hey, welcome into the Nick Saban show. Alabama wins it. And he'd start screaming, "We'll never forget you, blankety blank, little blankety blank, throwing late, 49-14. And he would die down, and we'd start over again. Hey, welcome into the Nick Saban show. Da, da, da. And he'd start again. Passing late, that's a BS, blah, blah, blah. He's yelling again. Third time we start over, and the guy starts yelling, and he's like, Saban turns around, screams up into the box and says, "Did you watch the blankety blank game? I was not running up the score throwing it. We couldn't hit the side of the barn today. Every time we ran it, it was a touchdown." So he was telling me we wasn't running up the score, letting JPW throw the football. So there's the greatest coach of all time yelling at a drunk in Arkansas, explaining to him we were not running up the score by letting our quarterback throw the ball.
We're trying to get the guys some practice, man. We got to get some reps. We got a big game next week.
That's what he was saying.
So
I knew it was next week, but he was like, we got to work on throwing the football.
Yeah.
So do you remember that first meeting? Like you're in the meeting room?
Yeah, I do remember it. I remember when he walked in, it was just like there was no it was like emotionless. You know, he just walks in. Yeah, I think he had this green jacket on, and the room was just dead silent. There was not you could hear a pin drop because we didn't know what we were about to get into. And it was about the time that we usually started like the fourth quarter program, which we didn't call that before he got there, but that was the very first thing on his agenda. He walks in, he starts immediately, like, it's almost like you go to syllabus day, your first day of class, like teacher hands out the agenda, what you're going to cover for the next 9 weeks or whatever. Everybody gets a sheet of paper, hands it out. You're going over what we're about to do for the next few months, what our expectations are for figuring us out. You know, hey, we didn't recruit you. We didn't choose you. You didn't choose us type deal, but we got to figure out how to make it work. And he starts laying down the law of what we're about to go through. And pretty much he doesn't hold anything back. I mean, the one thing about Coach Saban was he was always transparent. You knew exactly where he stood. He wasn't going to sugarcoat anything. And at that point in his career, taking over this program, there was no sugarcoating any of it. Like, he just kind of came in and was like, we're about to get after it. We're going to figure out what we've got, and we're going to try to figure out how to run some of y'all off. You know, it was kind of like a veiled threat. Like, if some of y'all leave, then that's going to be part of it. But fourth quarter program usually was like 3 weeks long. And that year, I think we did 8 weeks of fourth quarter program. And we had guys that ended up quitting because it was too much. And he put us through hell. And it was it was such a blur because as soon as he landed and was the head coach, it was immediate that we were off and running, and you didn't even have time to really think about it.
Well, you said Rocky Colburn was working you guys hard the day you found out Saban was going to be there. How different was it that first fourth quarter meeting when you guys went out, and what do you remember about that?
I remember the thing is just how detailed he was from what we wore. Like when we did our conditioning program when Shula was there and Rocky was there, you'd have guys wearing backwards hats. Nobody was dressed the same. It was just whatever you wanted to wear, you're just going out there and working out. And I remember when he shows up and Cochran's there and everybody has the same logoed shirts tucked in, no hats, same socks, tube socks, black. Everything was the same. Everybody looked the same. And then 8 stations, we thought what we were doing was difficult. And then we figured out what the two-a-days or the fourth quarter program was all about. There were trash cans set up every 5 yards. And I don't think there was a single soul that did not end up puking that first week of just getting acclimated to his practices were this way too. You never stopped moving. Like we used to just take a knee, drink some water, get some rest. Like it was just a completely different. I just remember guys that were so pissed. Like they did not sign up for this. They didn't want any part of it. And these were guys that were starters the year before. And the leadership of that team was very thin, I would say, at that point in time. And there were guys that were huge contributors that were really not good for the locker room because this was the hardest they've ever worked and the most demand they've ever had put on them in their entire football career. So that whole thing was a blur. I just remember Scott Crocker and Freddie Roach was funny. Like when he came back to help coach, he was like, how have y'all not punched that guy in the face? Yeah, because all he does is he's like, I swear if I was a player here, because he was a GA in the weight room, and he was like, it takes every ounce of me not to punch that guy in the face every single day because all he does is just scream. How do y'all not get tired of it? I'm like, man, I guess it's like having a kid. You just get used to him screaming all the time. You don't even hear it, but Man, what a different vibe, what a different pace of everything that we possibly could do.
Hey, we are the next round. We appreciate you guys coming out to Otey's tonight. Ryan Brown, Jim Dunaway, Cory Reamer, former Alabama linebacker. I'm Lance Taylor. We're going to get a little Q&A. If anybody does have questions, let us know. We'll get a mic to you guys. We're going to continue a little storytelling, though. So first year, 6-6, 7-6, I think, with a bowl. When did you realize, because after that, it was 16 consecutive double-digit win seasons. When did you realize this guy is about to create greatness?
I mean, I think even though the fact that we went 6-6, that first year after we had just gone 6-7 when Joe Kynes coached us in the Independence Bowl, that year we just got beat. Like it was just like we never felt like we were in ball games. That next year, even though we went 6-6, and I haven't looked back at this, but I'm pretty sure all 6 of those losses, maybe outside of 1 or 2, were all one possession games. Like they were all one score games.
Wasn't that Georgia in overtime?
It was Georgia in overtime. Yep. Yes.
What a lot of
Mitchell.
What a lot of people forget too is that LSU game you played at Bryant Denny. If you guys win that game, you control the West.
Yeah.
And it was. Yeah. I think Alabama led in the fourth quarter of that game.
I feel like we came out and we were like 5-0. Like I feel or 4-0. Like I think we won.
It was 4-0 because game day was there, right?
Yeah.
And then we went on a little skid.
Like, had that crappy game against Florida State. That was,
and that a year or two that we missed a lot of field goals against Arkansas?
Maybe.
I think we missed like 5 field goals at their place. Had a chance to win that ball game. I mean, it was just like you could just tell that there were a lot of people, and the senior class of 08 was really the class that really set the tone. There was like 6 guys: Antoine Caldwell, B.J. Stabler, John Parker Wilson, Rashad Johnson, and Matt Caddell, and another. I can't remember who the 6th one was, but that was all we had like as seniors that finished in 08. But they were kind of leaders of the 07 class. There are so many guys in that 07 class that really caused a lot of problems in the locker room because they just didn't want to buy in. They didn't want to do what he was asking of them because he demanded so much from everybody. And a lot of these guys were great players. And we were in a lot of those ball games. Like we played Florida State in Jacksonville, right?
Yeah,
it was a neutral site game in 07.
Yeah, boring
And
game.
we should have won that game.
Yeah.
And like there was just all these games that we were so close. So it did not take us long to realize like what if we buy in, like if we do what he's asking us to do, we can be successful. And I'll never forget going into the 2008 season, those 6 guys that were seniors, we went undefeated in the regular season and playing the SEC championship with a chance to play in the national championship in his second year, taking over a roster that he didn't even have really a full recruiting class at the entire time.
Right?
Number one
in the SEC championship.
And had a good lead going to the fourth quarter. And Tim Tebow played probably as far as throwing the football, some of his best quarterback he's ever.
He had a 2-touchdown lead, I think, or at least a 10-point lead in the fourth quarter. John Parker always gives me hell about it. He's like, if we had any
he
defense,
plays it on the defense.
he does.
Yeah.
If we had any defense that game, we could have easily been playing in a national championship. But you're right. Tim Tebow, if you take his entire career, I would say that was easily the best performance he has throwing the football. Like we had good coverage. Like Kareem Jackson, Javier Arenas were locking people up, but he put it where only those guys could catch it, and he made the throws all night long. And we should have won that ball game.
Do you remember the biggest play they had? I think they did it twice in the game. And I think it was to Hernandez.
Yeah, it was to a mass murderer.
Was the little what's it called? The little flea flicker?
Yeah, it was like a shovel, little tiny shovel.
Yeah, I remember that.
They did that once or twice. That were just devastating
because I'll never forget in 09, and I don't want to fast forward too far, but 09 when y'all played them again, the first time they ran it was like a 4-yard loss, and y'all were like, "You ain't doing that again."
Yeah,
practice that.
We're ready for that one.
Kirby Smart was making sure we were not going to get beat by that play.
That's right.
Yeah. That game, that 08 game was. And I'll never forget the locker room after that too. It was, and like you brought up when we had our conversation the other day of talking about what was it like after the Rose Bowl we won a national championship. Hey, thanks seniors, but those guys that are coming back, we got some work to do. The same thing happened in the locker room in Atlanta after we lost that. Obviously, we weren't trying to overlook Utah for the bowl game that season, but it was like, hey, appreciate you seniors, but we're so close. And he knew it. He could feel it, and that was. We all knew it too. And I'll never forget Rolando McClain. I'm pretty sure he was a freshman that year. Maybe he was a sophomore, But he stood up and he gave one of the greatest speeches after a loss that I've ever been around. But he pretty much laid out, if y'all don't remember this game, we're about to work for the next 12 months to get ready for next season. And this is the standard that we're setting ourselves to. And it was that was the full buy-in from the players at that point of like, we had everybody that we needed on that roster. We knew we could do something special.
So when you guys come into 2009, was that your senior season, by the way?
That was my senior year. Luckily. I tore my ACL my freshman year and had to take a medical my sophomore because I should have graduated in 08.
We learned early on in the media that there was always a message that Nick Saban was going to plant out there. And I think something you told us the other day was pretty fascinating too, because he would pick players to send a message through that to other players. And you were one of those players that was lucky enough to get the wrath of Nick Saban.
Be the whipping boy.
Yeah, I mean, and you said he undressed you.
There was a purpose to it. Yeah, it was. The funny thing was that Kirby did it. He just kind of like fed off of whatever Coach Saban did. So he would always just cuss me out all the time too. But he was actually directing at me. But yeah, Coach Saban would always just every single practice. We'd go out there from walkthroughs from the very beginning to the end of practice. It was just amazing how many times I could get a straw hat thrown at me or just being screamed at the entire time. And I'll never forget that exit interview. He's like, man, I just want to let you know, it wasn't because of what you were on. Now, granted, I talked to him about this years later. He was like, trust me, you messed up probably 80% of the time too, but there were other guys that also messed up that needed to hear the message. But you were just the guy that always I would just give him that deer in the headlights look. When he'd start yelling at me, like, you just can't get emotional about it. And you just kind of stare back at him, shake your head, say, yes, sir. And he was like, yeah, those weren't always directed right at you, but I needed everybody to hear. And you were just the guy that was always in my sights, in my crosshairs.
He respected the you taking that, I know, because he loved to challenge you, but he didn't mind if you challenged him back a little bit. I remember it was 2008, the first year I was doing the coaches show, and about the third week, all I would do was, I would say very little on the show. Yeah. It was welcome to the Nick Saban show. Nick, or Coach, and I wouldn't say anything. About halfway through that show, and it's about the third week, he said, you can talk a little bit more, right? And I said, it's not the Jim Dunaway show. It's the Nick Saban show. You're the one that's getting paid to be here. And from that point on, we had a good relationship once I said that back to him.
But it took that moment for you to have that form. We all, none of us had those moments that you see in the last 5 to 10 years of where he's kind of jovial. Like, the most we ever got from him was we'd be in the defensive meeting room, and he was always all business. And every once in a while, he'd be sitting in the front of the meeting room. All of us are just glued to the tape, trying to figure out what install we're doing this day. And he's going over it. And he's kind of and then all of a sudden he would just throw a joke out there. But his jokes were so bad. Like, nobody even knew that they were a joke. And he would just be sitting in the front. We would be staring at the back of his head. And you would just you would hear him say something and nobody would laugh. And then he kind of just would turn around and kind of had this chuckle about him. And it was that was the most that we ever got out of the guy from that side of his personality, because we never, and that was it. So none of us knew how to have kind of that back and forth with him a little bit until Rolando came, and Rolando wasn't afraid of anybody. So he started peeling the onion back a little bit. But before that, we were all just we're showing up for work. You knew exactly what you were doing. There wasn't any joking around all the time. He tried to, and but it was just those first couple years that he was there. And he was putting us through the grinder of just trying to figure out what he had.
Well, no, that's not what I remember about those early teams. A little bit of 08, but especially 9, 10, 11, 12. They'd even say it on game day or in Sports Center that it was almost like the Russian hockey team back in the day. You guys played with zero emotion back then. It was it was murder ball, and you guys it didn't look like there was any joy in winning at all. It was just about dotting the I's and crossing the T's.
And the perfect example of this was when I went to the Jets. I was in camp. And Bart Scott was the starting middle linebacker for the Jets at the time. But we ran the exact same defense at Alabama as they were running with Rex Ryan. It was just called something different. But everybody was just so focused on doing their job and their role. Even every defense that was called, you weren't for an example, I always had to take on the fullback or the pulling guard whenever some other team ran power. Well, we go to the Jets, and they were running power against us the entire time. and John Connor was the fullback. They drafted John Connor out of Kentucky, and he was the fullback at the Jets at the time. And they ran power like 10 plays in a row. And every time I had to get in there and get underneath the block. So I pretty much had to take on John Connor for 10 straight plays. And I was just getting my ass beat. I mean, Matt, you remember John Connor. He was a bowling ball. Like, you're not going to win that battle. And I remember Bart Scott being like, hey, man, you don't have to hit him every single time. And I was like, yes, I do. Coach Saban told me 3 years ago, if there's a fullback and they're running power, I got to take on the fullback. That's your job. That's how robotic we were for those first few years. And it was just like, it was ingrained into you. I told you the other day, like after the national championship game, we all were kind of sitting around like, okay, we got to celebrate. And we were all kind of like, okay, game's over with. It's time to move on. What's next? And it's like, well, we're seniors. Like, you kind of had to remind yourself that there wasn't anything next. That was it. Let's go celebrate. So,
you know, after 2008, I mean, we all figured you guys are going to be really good in 2009. But going into that Florida game, the rematch of the SEC championship, it just didn't seem like a losable game because of what Florida had. And for Tim Tebow to go out like that, it didn't seem realistic. But was there a point in that season where you guys were like, we are the best team in college football. We're going to, this journey is going to take us undefeated. We're going to win a national championship.
I think at that point in time, with what college football was, when it's like you've got to play flawless. Not only do you have to play flawless, but you've also got to have some things go your way. Tennessee game that year, we had to block 2 field goals. Luckily, their kicker was hurt. He was kicking in the back of the center's head every time. That game, we just barely scraped out of beating Ole Miss at Ole Miss. Like, we had a lot of games where we ended up winning, but it wasn't like we had a dominant performance.
South Carolina.
Yeah. I mean, it was just like we had a number of those games where you look at like Greg McElroy's stats and Mark Ingram's stats. Like somehow we found a way to win the ball game, but it wasn't always pretty. So I think that we just had a belief of like, we just got to go out there and do what we got to do. And he always, kind of cliche, but he always said it like, don't focus on the scoreboard. Somehow we found a way to win those ball games. That Florida game was easily the most complete game that we had played that entire season. I think we were probably the most confident after we won that ball game. Of course, we had, a full year of watching that Florida tape because they were the standard at the time, and they were the best team easily. And what we did that night and just dominated from start to finish. It was kind of just the culmination, icing on the cake of it felt like the national championship for us for that season. So, it was, and then beating Texas after that, obviously, but beating that Florida team, I think there's so much relief after we did it because there was Florida stuff just posted around the locker room everywhere for motivation throughout the entire season.
Well, I remember showing up that day at the Georgia Dome, and the picture right here is behind you. Florida was going to wear those specialty uniforms.
Yeah.
And so I got that tip from Tracy Wolfson on Friday.
Which I always like those, by the way.
I did too.
It's a good-looking uni.
Yeah.
But I think that was the first time they ever wore that uniform was that day.
Was it really?
And Tracy Wolfson had said, hey, look at the helmet they're wearing tomorrow. And I was like, oh, a special uniform.
Yeah.
So I had it on my Friday night cast that Florida could come out in these uniforms. And then you guys became infamous as you went through, all of a sudden the Georgia game came to everybody's mind. Oh, special uniform, the blackout.
Yep.
And I felt like it was a bad move by Urban Meyer to come out in a specialty uniform.
Hey, especially uniforms against Alabama when Nick Saban was there never really worked out very well.
Did not work well.
No.
We are the next round. Jim Dunaway. I'm Lance Taylor. Special guest Cory Reamer, former Alabama linebacker. We are celebrating the Nick Saban era, 17 years of greatness. If you guys have any questions for Cory, for Dunaway, whoever, we've got an extra mic here. You can just come up to the stage. We'll get you guys taken care of. We're going to be here until 8 o'clock hanging out and just telling Saban stories. So you leave in 2009. You guys are undefeated, won a national championship. Obviously, Nick Saban's first at Alabama. And then 2010, you can make an argument after 2007, his worst season, losing 3 games. And you could also make an argument that was one of his more talented teams. So what happened in 2010? I know you weren't there, but just watching that first year out.
Man, I think and he always talks about this, is the hardest thing to overcome for us is when you have success is being able to do it all over again and still have that same drive. Maybe that was some of it, but it was easily the most talented team that we had up until that point. That roster was just loaded from top to bottom, but Dante Hightower was the leader. Was the leader for that defense at that time. He was coming off a knee injury in 2009. We didn't have, and we had a team like this. I can't remember which season it was, but it was like a couple of years ago that they had really talented roster. I think it was Will Anderson's, not their last year, but maybe his junior year or sophomore year. So we got all this talent out there, but there's not any of those guys that are the vocal leaders. And you could kind of see it over time, like throughout that season. Like you just needed, you got to have somebody that is that vocal, holding everybody accountable type of leader. And it seemed like 10 just didn't have that, like 9 did. Rolando was gone, and Rolando was that guy for everybody on the defense and for the entire team too. And you lose him. Dante's trying to find his way back after coming off the knee injury, not fully healthy. Knee just wasn't 100% at the time, and you just didn't have those. You had a lot of guys that were really good players that could go out there and lead by example, but it just wasn't that every single day in practice being vocal, holding everybody to that accountability. Probably was what the cause of that season would be my guess. But I mean, at that point in time, we became the hunted, not the hunter, at that time. So I think there was a lot of teams that were always excited when Alabama showed up. South Carolina with Stephen Garcia.
Yeah.
And we make quarterbacks look really good. It's amazing how we do it.
Well, I was at that game, and that was the first loss of my time of doing the Saban show. And that day, that place was crazy. You could almost, I don't know about you, but you could almost feel a day where upset was a possibility. And that was one of those days from the moment you got to the stadium. And who is their big wide receiver? Because
Alshon Jeffrey. He had a game.
He had a game that day. Yeah.
Were you at that game or just watching?
I was not there. That was my I got cut by the Jets in September of that year. And from September to December, I kind of enjoyed my life. I went and played a lot of golf, hunted as much as I possibly could, and didn't go to very many games. Stayed far away from it.
After that game, South Carolina rushes the field, right, tearing down the goalposts. And so we do the Saban show on the field is what we're supposed to do. So the post-game press conference is over, and I'm going out on the field looking for him. I'm like, where's the camera going to be set up? Because I knew Nick was not far behind. And it's on the field. And the South Carolina people are still on the field. And it's down by the student section. So those that aren't in the field are right there by where they have the camera set up. And I'm like, guys, we can't do the show right here. He's going to hate this, and they're not going to let us do the show. And they're like, we always do it on the field. And I was like, hey, we've got to move. He's not going to want to come out here and do it on the field. Well, where do you want to do it? And I wasn't in charge, but I was like, well, we can do it anywhere, but not out here. I said, let's go back where the news conference was. And we did that show in nothing but white cinder, like we're in a bathroom, white cinder block post-game room echoing. It was just the worst show ever. But you have to know me to love me. Typical Jim kiss ass. As soon as he walks up, I'm like, hey, they wanted you to do this on the field, but I said, let's come in here so you wouldn't have to deal with the fans. He's like, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, you get a little extra brownie points from him.
Hey,
how much pressure is that?
And rolled somebody under the bus.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's when I learned that after losses, like he builds the team back up. And after wins, he was always beating you guys down, it seemed. He always was trying to get you guys to whatever this point is. And that's when I started to learn how nervous I should be as a fan during the games. Like if there's an early mistake made and you watch him on the sidelines and he's encouraging the guys coming off the field, patting them on the back.
It's going to be a long day.
It's going to be a hard game. He doesn't know if he's going to win. But if you make a mistake in the first quarter and he's chewing everybody's ass out, I'm like, it's no big deal. He knows they're going to win this.
Was it this year that we saw a lot of that, or was it last season? I feel like it was last season. It was last season. Like every single game, it was almost like he was kind of acting, had that same type of demeanor.
Yeah, because I remember, gosh, this has been several years ago. I think it was right before the 2001 SEC Championship. We're doing a show from Atlanta. Another Hoover product, Will Lowry, was on the show, and we were asking about the softer Nick Saban. And we were like, what do you make of this coach? He goes, I don't know. I didn't play for that coach. That's not the Nick Saban I played for.
We had no experience with that. I mean, it was just crazy when you went back for the first time as a former player, even early, 2010, 11, 12, how different. He still wasn't like that soft. It didn't really happen until the last probably 10 years, well after we were gone, and I think that's just a credit to him where he's realizing I gotta treat kids differently. I can't be this guy anymore. The game has changed and how he adapts to just how he even deals with former players. Like You got to get the psychology degree that he was. I mean, the mind games of what he always did. It was incredible.
I wanted to ask you, because I've always heard this from reliable sources, the amount of tests and paperwork and people you talk to inside that program. I think he builds a file on each one of you, a psychological file to know how to talk to you, coach you up, and deal with you.
You know, being out of football and into just the real world, and you kind of realize how, you know, I'm a parent now, and I'm trying to coach up my kids the same way, and it's like you can't do that. Everybody's different. The fact that he could diagnose kids on the fly, like, how can I deal with this guy? But you're probably right. He's probably got a full file of every player that he's ever coached of how to deal with each one of them. And he was the first one that really brought in a psychiatrist to come talk to players. And we went through all this mental training during the off season. We were like, man, we got to do this. Like, it's summertime. There's a bunch of people at the pool right now. We got to sit up here and listen to all this stuff and do all tests. But it was probably a lot more, just as much for him as it was for us. He's learning how to coach those guys. And it was like Rolando, for example, is like, I love Rolando, but he knew and he could tell when Rolando showed up to the complex what kind of temperament Rolando had and what kind of game it was going to be. He always showed up for games, but practice was always, all right, how am I going to handle this guy? Sometimes he never had to say anything. Rolando ran the practice. Sometimes he would have to just kind of ease Rolando into it. Or there was always players that were like that who just – and he could do it just like that without even thinking about it.
And I think that may be one of his biggest assets.
No,
great on the whiteboard, great X's and O's, but the mental game, the psychology of it all, I think that is what he was better than any other coach in the history of sports.
Yeah.
Former Alabama linebacker Cory Reamer hanging out with us at Otey's Tavern. We are the next round. Lance Taylor, Jim Dunaway, Ryan Brown. Brown, if we are streaming this live, by the way.
Yep.
If we have any questions or comments, let us know.
I was just we're in a photo right here, so I was going to
I did want to, from our perspective. I don't know about you guys, and Dunaway, you've been in the game longer than any of us. But you know, Nick Saban was one of those guys early on. I'll never forget. We used to do SEC media days from the old Winfrey Hotel at the Galleria. Yep. And I remember a co-host didn't show up that day, so I had to interview Nick Saban pretty early in my career one-on-one. And he sat down with all the cameras around. I was terrified. And it's just one of those where he's a small guy, but he's really intimidating. And I think as we grew as a team here on the next round, it became a lot more comfortable talking to him.
Yeah.
But I don't know about you guys, but early on in my career broadcasting, he was one of the most, if not the most intimidating guys to talk to for me.
Yeah. So let me tell the story when Dunaway and this is before we joined up with Lance. So this is 2007. He's just gotten the job. And Doug Walker, you remember Doug, right? Doug was the media relations guy.
Yeah.
He calls us and he's like, you know, coach is trying to meet some members of the local media, and we would like for you and Dunaway to come over, spend some time with him in his office, and then you guys could do an interview to use on the show. We're like, yeah, we'll do that. So one morning,
how much Nick was looking forward to that.
Yeah, I'm sure he was loving it. So one morning, me and Dunaway jump in the car, we drive to Tuscaloosa. And we walk in his office, and Terry Saban's sitting behind the desk. And, of course, we walk in and never met her in our life, obviously. She reacts like we're her long-lost nephews that she hadn't seen in forever. Could not have been nicer. And she's got all these books with, like, floor samples and fabric samples on his desk. She's outfitting their home. So we're standing there talking to her, and Coach Saban walks in, and, you know, we introduce ourselves. And he walks up to the desk, and in that dry, quiet voice goes, "Am I ever going to get my office back from you?" And she goes, "Oh, huh." You know, she gives it back to him, right? So we go in that meeting room that's right off his office, and we're sitting at the desk, and at the big conference table. To our left is the depth chart. To our right is the recruiting board. So we sit down. He sits down. We start talking. You go, "Give me 1 second." He gets up, and he walks over to the wall and flips 2 switches. And these 2 screens start coming down over the boards.
We have no cameras.
Yeah. No cameras. Nothing.
You don't want you to see it, though.
I mean, the most awkward. It was like a scene from The Office. Reamer.
Yeah.
It's like
they were the slowest thing
ever. 2
2
minutes to get down.
And he doesn't say a word. He just sits there and lets him go down. And it was just super awkward. And I was like, "Coach, we're too dumb to know any of that." And he goes, "Oh, I wasn't trying to hide it from you. I just didn't want the screens to be buzzing while we're doing our interview."
Yeah.
I'm like,
Yeah.
Kirby got a snapshot of that.
Yeah, Kirby got one on the way out the door.
Yeah, he did.
So we talked. I mean, we just had a normal conversation at the interview, but I've always laughed thinking of him hiding the depth chart and the recruiting board from two radio show hosts from Birmingham.
I always wanted to know what y'all's experience was like, because we always watched him just absolutely annihilate the media for asking bad questions. So, I mean, it was just as intimidating for us as it was probably for y'all when y'all had to deal with him for the first few
Well,
times.
I'll tell you the most uncomfortable thing, and we all did the coaches show with him, and I only did it 2 times with him from Bomb Howard's way back in the day. And I just went in, and I've always been one of those weird guys that's going to ask weird questions. And I remember, I forgot some of the first questions I asked him, but the last one, I asked him the last movie to make him cry. And he's like, where in the hell are you getting these questions? And then he went into this tangent about The Godfather. So he never really answered my question, but he had one of these hidden messages about family. And so he went to The Godfather about that. So, but I was always intimidated till about 3 or 4 years ago.
Oh, I was intimidated until recently too. But that same meeting in 2007, I wasn't retained to host the Nick Saban show initially because I'd done Franchione, then all of the Shula shows, the one Mike Price show in between that, I did that too. But I'd left local TV, and with that, I'd given up my spot on the Saban show. The guy who replaced me at 13, Don Hawes, was the guy that was going to do it in 2007. So in our first meeting, that same awkward lowering of the blockers in the meeting room, I was like, hey, I'm Jim Dunaway. I used to host the coaches show here. And he could have cared less. He was like the handshake like that.
Yeah.
He turned and walked away from me. And I was like, I don't guess I'll be doing the Nick Saban show to start with at all. So I was intimidated from that point on.
I'll tell you, though, real quick, Brown, I was one of those, I just had this feeling that this was going to be it for Saban. And look, Nick Saban.
You called it. I was listening to the show, and you kept saying it. I was like, no way.
Yeah.
Our buddy AB texted me and was like, I keep hearing rumors. You've been calling, and I was like, it's always a rumor.
It wasn't really a rumor. It was just kind of a feel. And I go back, we were doing a golf tournament out at North River. And this is back in May. And he might have purchased the home in Jupiter by then, or maybe not.
It was after that, shortly
Okay.
after that.
Yeah.
But we're sitting down, and they bring Saban over to sit with us. And we're the only media out there. But he sits back. He's so relaxed. And it's like he had nowhere to be. And normally we're on such a pitch count with him. We just know his time is so valuable. But he just had that feeling like you guys can keep asking me questions. And from that moment, I was like, this is different. Like, I just felt it was different.
Yeah, so that was where it turned for you.
That's where it turned
Well,
for me. Then the
yeah.
house, and then just the interactions, social media with the family. There was just a lot of things that it just seemed like it was time.
But you know us, Reamer. We're not going to change our show for anybody.
I know.
So we always let
I was uncomfortable. I changed the channel a few times.
when Rockstar.
When y'all would interview him, I was like, I can't do
no,
this.
it
I
was
can't
the
listen to it.
Rockstar questions.
Yeah, Rockstar
all his hypotheticals.
I know.
I couldn't do it.
I know. So but we're not changing our show for anybody. Our show is our show. It could be President Biden. It could be Donald Trump. It could be Nick Saban. It doesn't matter. We're still going to do our show. So we always thought it was funny to let Rockstar ask a question. And I'll never forget Greg Sankey one time. I was like, I'm sitting at a red light on 280, and I got it, tune right in. You guys are talking to Nick Saban, and I hear, Coach, this is Rockstar. And he said, I spit my coffee out. I'm like, what are they doing?
That's when it got uncomfortable. Every
Yep.
time he would announce himself,
I
hey,
know.
Coach, Rockstar here.
Coach, this is Rockstar.
You could hear the air come out of his lungs.
You could hear Coach Saban like, oh boy, here we go.
But he did tell me, like I did
Hey, Rockstar.
the last time I did the coaches show that Lance was talking about, Nick Saban had just been on our show. And when he sat down, I was like, hey, I appreciate you coming on our show the other day. He's like, he said this, so maybe I should have thought of this as a sign of retirement. And he goes, I like coming on your show. You guys ask me odd questions that make me think. And I was like, that's a heck of a compliment right there. I'll take that.
Hey, same thing. Same thing. It was like you're the one getting. You would never know that he actually felt that way. You always thought it was the most. He hated y'all's show because of that last question. I'll give Rockstar credit. I think the fact that he's done that for so many years made him be able to go on the Pat McAfee show and be relatable. It's just amazing the personality that he has on that show now. I give Rockstar a little bit of credit.
Yeah,
I'm trying to
he
make him
deserves
out of
it.
his show.
Do you ever wonder what his head was like when he was away from football? And did you ever really think he ever got away from football? It's hard for me to think about him being retired because I can't imagine him not thinking about football.
I think I always thought that whatever he did outside of it was always something competitive. That was the thing. Even if it wasn't football related, whatever he was doing, there was some sort of competitive, whether it was pulling guys on the boat, at his lake house. It was a competition for him to see if he could throw some guys off.
He was keeping score.
And he was. I mean, that was the thing, is that it never, maybe he wasn't thinking football all the time, but there was some sort of a competitive nature. Juices had to be flowing. Like, I love the story that Jeff Purinton told on y'all's show the other day about the basketball game. I mean, it was just like that kind of stuff. That's how he always was. I mean, I'll never forget the first year we had that leadership group that he kind of created when he was first down there, of like seniors and juniors, that they were the ones that players had to report to if they had issues or whatever. We had to punish our own teammates, and they had to come and stand in front of us. But so he took that group of 12 out to his lake house, and he had just gotten the brand new boat, and we're out there, and it was Greg McElroy and Julio Jones. They had 2 tubes behind this big old boat that he was pulling, and he loved to see if he could throw guys off. I mean, we're getting pretty close to camp at this point too. And all of a sudden, I've been on a boat my entire life. I know what tubing looks like, and I know when it's about to be really bad. All of a sudden, both lines of the tubes with Greg and Julio out there get all this slack in the line. Yeah. And it's just like, and he hammers down on the throttle. And all of a sudden, you see Greg and Julio just go flying through the air. And I was like, he just ripped all 4 shoulders of both of those guys out. There's no chance those guys are coming back in here healthy. I was like, there goes our season.
Yeah, we're done. QB1, wide receiver.
Yeah, I was like, we're shot. I was like, and he laughed his tail off, because that's all he was trying to do, is get throwing those guys off. And I was like, that could have been the end of the beginning for us in 2009.
We did have a listener wanted to ask you this, and by the way, we are going to throw some more questions. If you guys have any questions here in Otey's, please let us know. We've got a microphone right there for you. You're more than welcome to walk up here. We got little T or EG. They can help you out with it. And any questions you have for Cory or any of us. But we had Brett from New Mexico wanted to know the hardest hitting teammate when you were on the team. I've got a feeling I know this. I think you've already mentioned his name, but I could be wrong.
I would love to hear what your thought is.
I would think Rolando.
Okay, so is it hardest hitting defensive player or guy that delivered the hardest hit? Like, that's the question. So I have an offensive guy that Roy Upchurch was the hardest hitting guy that I ever played against, and that's any other team, any other running back, anybody else. I don't know what it is, but I always called it heavy head. Like, he had the heaviest head. Whenever he wasn't huge, but he could get a momentum going in the way that he delivered the hit when you were running through the hole. You would see stars every single time.
Do you think he's responsible for a concussion?
Easily. I mean, Roy, when we used to have to do running back drills and linebackers, I would always count and make sure. I was like that kid in elementary school. Like, you're like, okay, he's going to be with him. He's going to be with him. He's going to be with him. I'm not with Roy. Give me a freshman or somebody up here so that I don't have to go against Roy, because it would just set the tone for the whole practice. You'd be miserable for the rest of practice if you had to hit Roy early. And it was every time. I mean, he was easily the hardest hitting guy that I ever played against. Rolando had this like arm tackle kind of thing about him. He didn't like to deliver like big hits. Dante Hightower was easily the hardest hitting guy that I think I ever played with on the defensive side of the ball. And he was so big. Like, he was just built like differently. And you'd be in the locker room and it'd be after practice or after a workout or whatever. And he was just like, he was a kid at heart. He loved to play. Like, he always liked, and he knew he was the strongest guy in the locker room. If he ever got like a grip on you, like he'd come up and like kind of bear hug you around. That was like, you just be like tapping out for life. You'd be like, there is nothing that I can do. This kid he can manhandle me. There's no getting out of it. I don't care how strong you are. But I saw him make hits that I don't think I've ever seen anybody else. I mean, he was just an unbelievable athlete. Freak.
All time, though, of Saban's time there, Reuben Foster was.
Yeah, I never got to hit him.
Yeah.
But watching him run down on kickoff, that guy
he did not care.
He did not care.
No.
He did not have any care about his body at all.
I'll never forget another Hoover guy, Michael Neiswender, was in studio with us when he finished his career, and he told the story of he was on kick return, and they were working on onside kick. Or I guess he was kick coverage. They're working on onside kick. So they kick it, and Trent Richardson is on kick return. And he says the ball bounces, it goes right to Trent Richardson. He goes, we were told never to take a play off, right? He goes, so I light Trent Richardson up. He goes, I hit him as hard as I could hit him. And he said, we had no more hit the ground. I could hear Coach Saban yelling. And he goes, I look around and he is on a beeline to me and cuss me up and down for hitting Trent Richardson. I'm like, what am I supposed to do? If I took the play off, he'd have cussed me out too.
Yeah, he'd have been the one in trouble. I'll tell you one of the funniest. You remember Michael Dijon went to Hoover with us?
Yeah.
He walked on to Alabama. He was one of our roommates, one of my very best friends. One of the hardest hits that I've ever seen, by the way, is from Michael Dijon. We were doing half line, which is center guard, tackle, linebacker, defensive line, running back. You're only running to one side of the offense. And I won't say the name of the running back. I'll leave him out of this. But Michael Dijon gets up, and he knows exactly where this ball is going. It's half line, so you don't have to really guess that hard. But Michael goes down full speed, and and this was like a 4-star running back that we had coming out of high school. I think he was his freshman or sophomore year. And Michael tattoos him, like breaks his helmet. Like he hits him so hard.
What was the reaction from you guys?
Oh, we all lost it. I mean, we climbed all over him because it was walk-on versus 4-star kid recruit. And the very next day at practice, that running back had been converted to linebacker. They moved him out. He made him move positions. He made him change positions. Yeah, it was like, you're no longer a running back. You are a linebacker now. It was awesome.
You'll remember this since you played there. Bob brings up the great Eddie Conyers. And he said, I was at practice and watched Saban absolutely rip official 90-year-old Eddie Conyers a new one. And after practice, they just laughed it off.
Every day. I mean, that was every day.
On Eddie every day?
Every day.
So for those that don't know, Eddie Conyers, longtime official, and he officiated every practice y'all did.
Every single practice.
And when you were there, he was probably in his 80s.
Oh, he was still moving.
Yeah, he's been forever.
He was still moving.
He was still moving pretty good at the time. And he never threw a flag. Like, that was his deal. Like, Coach Saban always got onto him. He's like, Eddie, you got to throw a flag, man. We're not going to get any better unless you throw a flag. And he would always just look at Coach Saban and be like, I didn't see nothing, Coach. And he would just rip him a new one, and Eddie would just turn around and smile, and he'd just go back to doing whatever he was doing, and he was just out there having a blast. I think they had a special bond. Eddie was the man. We all loved Eddie.
Yeah, I bet you've never heard this story, and it goes back to officiating. But Dunaway, so we've been fortunate enough to be honorary coaches, whatever that means, on an A-Day game. And we one year they decided to let a lot of these media members be officials of the A-Day game.
Yeah, I remember.
So, Dunaway, I'll let you take it from here. But when you guys all met with the regular officials, with Saban, before that game, what Saban said, and I know we got kids in the audience, so we got to be a little careful.
It was me, Clay Travis, Mike Dubberly, and then two people from ESPN. I can't remember who it was. And we're reffing the A-Day game. God, what year was this? I want to say it was either 2010 or 2011. And so we've gone to class. We got there an hour before we go into the field. So 2 hours before the game. And Steve Shaw puts us through a couple of things. And the one thing he tells us is, whatever you do, don't blow your whistle. Don't blow your whistle, because I'll blow the whistle. I'll blow the play dead every time. He was going to be the head official. And anything else I can't correct. But if you blow your whistle, then we got to live with that. So don't blow your whistle. So we get out there. We're meeting the assistant coaches and the other real officials who are there, and we're going to fill in for them. And then they take us to meet Nick. And, I was already doing his coach's show, and we go over there to meet Nick. We're all in our SEC uniforms, and he shakes our hands, and he goes, whatever you do, don't blank up my game. Don't blank up my game. And
being dead serious, too.
Oh, and then
he was not joking.
And then he turns and walks away. That was it. That was the meeting. Don't blank up our game. And Steve was like, all right, we got that.
Thank you, Coach.
So we're in the game, and I've already made a
Did y'all do anything? Did y'all just stand there and watch?
No.
You did throw a flag.
Wait.
No. The greatest call in college football history. Alabama's offense was struggling a little bit in this game, and they throw a pass on the sidelines. I love a good cheer. And it was bang, bang on the sidelines, and they've got replay officials and everything. So is his foot in or not? And I go running down the sidelines. It's a catch.